Startling announcement, although if you've been following the machinations over the last couple of days, perhaps not so surprising, because the FCC staff have now joined lawyers at the Justice Department in opposing this Time Warner Cable deal. This Time Warner Cable purchase by Comcast. This was a $45.2 billion transaction, and there are lots of deals in its wake, including AT&T for DirecTV as well. But now FCC staff members are said to think that the merger would threaten competition and innovation and should be resolved or at least addressed in an administrative hearing. That was a big setback. So now Comcast saying, forget it, it's not worth our time to pursue this Time Warner Cable deal, would at least put the kibosh on that and allow Brian Roberts, the CEO of Comcast, to plan for his next step. Perhaps his next step is to make another acquisition. It's not clear what that might be. I know Rich Greenfield of BTIG spoke on Bloomberg Surveillance earlier this morning and was discussing the likelihood of perhaps Comcast looking at an overseas acquisition, certainly taking advantage of the strong dollar, but looking really to complement its full suite of services and products rather than going after another company in the United States where there might be some regulatory issues. Time Warner Cable shares are falling in response to this. Certainly that's not a surprise given the drop here. It's losing about 1% right now, 148.24, and we can see that Comcast shares are also moving on this announcement too, or not. I should preface that it's not an announcement so much as our reporting that shows that Comcast is likely to drop the Time Warner Cable deal. We will, of course, bring you confirmation when that does happen. Right now, this is according to our reporting, and you see Comcast shares actually getting a little bit of an increase here, up by more than 2% to $60.01. Alex?
All right, Scar, thanks so much. Well, Alex Sherman is joining us now as well on this deal. He is our media M&A reporter. Alex, what's your take on this news that Comcast could drop Time Warner Cable?
Well, I mean, this is we're lucky to, I think, have the story first, and if our reporting is accurate, Comcast has made the decision at this point that they're going to pull the plug on this deal. Apparently, they may be having a board meeting later today, but the decision has already been made at this stage. And if you had been following our coverage, really starting from last night, it may not be a surprise at this point, with the FCC recommending that this deal get kicked to a hearing. The chances of a company fighting that, spending the time to fight this thing, and also the DOJ, which was leaning towards suing against it, it may just have been too much for Comcast. Remember, this deal has no breakup fee. So when Comcast signed the deal with Time Warner Cable way back in February of 2014, agreeing to do this, they knew that there was a chance that regulators wouldn't take too kindly to a deal that consolidates so much power, so much broadband capacity, plus, of course, NBC Universal is owned by Comcast. We thought for a little while that the deal would go through because Comcast and Time Warner Cable don't compete with each other. So this isn't nearly as straightforward as, say, AT&T T-Mobile when that deal was blocked, in the sense that a competitor would be going away, which, of course, has all sorts of pricing power implications. This one was a bit hazier, and it really has been up until last Friday when we broke the story that the DOJ was leaning toward potentially suing to break the deal, and things have fallen off a cliff in a hurry for Comcast. And now, of course, we are hearing that Comcast has already made the decision, and a formal announcement could come as soon as tomorrow, we are hearing.
Right, Alex, really this event's unfolding very quickly. Also joining us is Cory Johnson, Bloomberg West editor-at-large in San Francisco. Cory, what's the significance here of Comcast walking away, potentially walking away?
Well, I think the significance is huge here. I mean, first, as it relates to this deal was a transformative deal. It was going to really make sure that most Americans would receive their broadband internet from a single company. It would create a massive sort of power for Comcast as one big company in terms of deciding what deals to strike with the likes of Disney and ESPN and other Time Warner and HBO and CNN and those important companies. It was going to be a big deal for the types of content people receive, whether it was Hulu or YouTube. We didn't know quite how that was going to play out. The implications for the companies that sell enterprise hardware to the broadband providers like Comcast and Time Warner. We're going to have only one fewer customer to deal with, and that could be a very big deal for the enterprise hardware companies. I think this is also a really big deal from a regulatory framework, as Alex was just saying. for the Department of Justice to apply a different rationale, right? It used to be they would look at geographies and they'd say, as long as your geographies don't overlap, when it's a telecommunications kind of deal, which is what this is principally, if your geographies don't overlap, then the deal should be okay. I think what the Department of Justice recognized is that we're talking about a different kind of business now, that what was true in radio and was true in broadcast television, maybe those standards should not be applied to the modern era of broadband, and that the service overlap and the power that this company would wield across the country was too much for any one company to have control of.
Scarlet, you've been looking into sort of the effect on the stock as we continue to talk about these headlines. It looks like Time Warner Cable now sort of back to where it was before, back to neutral.
Yeah, it's very interesting. If you pull up a chart of how Time Warner shares are trading, and let me see if I could do it on the screen behind me. Let's pull this up. This is Time Warner Cable, and it was basically below. Actually, you can see it on your screen in front of you. It's basically below the unchanged line through most of the trading sessions. And right there, that leg lower, right about 1,500, that was when the headlines crossed the Bloomberg terminal. And you could see the dramatic drop and then a move right back up. So, yes, we're back to where we were. We're slightly higher up by 0.4%. And again, as Alex was saying earlier, Alex Sherman to Alex Steele, that if you've been following our reporting, there were indications that there are increased challenges to this deal happening. And here you can see the chart once again. This is that big slide lower and then a recovery. We're almost near our session highs once again, up by 0.5%. I'm also going to pull up Comcast's share price because as the acquirer, that one is moving, and it's interesting. It's moving higher here. Comcast getting that leg higher following that headline, up by 2.2%. And in addition, let's just pull up Charter Communications as well. Charter had tried and failed in its bid to acquire Time Warner Cable to Comcast. Does Charter Communications come back in here to try to make another attempt to buy Time Warner Cable? It's unknowable right now, but you could see that dramatic reaction there, and the stock is up by 0.5%. Alex?
Well, that's a good question for Alex Sherman. Alex, you've been talking about the implication for Charter. If this Comcast-Time Warner deal falls through, that stock is up on the news. What is your takeaway at this moment?
I think it's one of the reasons why Time Warner Cable stock also hasn't taken a huge hit downward. There's a buyer, theoretical buyer, waiting for them in the wings. The question is how soon potentially will a deal come together. It may be, I know Craig Moffitt, who's been covering this and really the cable industry for about 15 years, he said it's probably more of a when than an if that Charter buys Time Warner Cable. The only question is how long will it take for these two sides to come together, and will the deal in fact be friendly, because Charter had to come at Time Warner Cable hostilely in January of 2014, and it actually pushed Time Warner Cable toward Comcast. So can these two sides get a deal done in a friendly manner?
Cory, when you look at a potential now Charter Time Warner deal, what's the significance of the difference there in a Comcast Time Warner?
I mean, this could be a whole new world when it comes to cable acquisitions. If the Department of Justice has their head around a different notion of what competition means, when the geographical borders between consumers matter less to the Department of Justice than the control any company has over the way we receive all of our information on the internet, whether it's news programming or it's cat videos, right? If that's what the Department of Justice is starting to think about, then the rules that might have applied to a Charter Time Warner deal, maybe it's a whole new rule book right here. I mean, surely Comcast had some private guidance that their deal might be approved before they proposed it, but the ground has shifted underneath them.
But Cory, is this really a DOJ story, or is this an FCC story? I mean, the DOJ has been unraveling over the last few days, but the news today was about the FCC wanting a hearing on the deal, which is never good news for a merger.
Right. Well, it was both, right? So both problems have been raised here, and I think, look, this is also a shocker for everyone who thinks that everything that happens in Washington is predetermined by how much money you spend on lobbyists. I mean, Comcast spent second only to Northrop Grumman in its spending on lobbyists in the last 2 years. So they had the revolving door as well of people leaving government, leaving the FCC, going to Comcast lobbyists, going from Comcast lobbyists to the FCC. That revolving door as well didn't seem to work in favor of Comcast here. But again, I think the rules may have changed here, and it could have a lot of implication for deals that looked like they would have had a clear path in the past.
Part of the issue with the FCC at this stage, Alex, to your point, is that from our reporting, the FCC was not all that pleased with how Comcast dealt with the conditions when they bought NBC Universal. And that may have been a big factor why they didn't want to accept a deal with conditions for Time Warner Cable. We have reported about the Hulu incident where Comcast may have interfered with a potential sale of Hulu when they were supposed to be simply passive investors there. There may have been other things. Potentially we'll find out more about what the DOJ was looking at. But we definitely have heard from several sources that the FCC has not been pleased with how Comcast has adhered to several of the different conditions on that NBCU transaction, and that was one of the reasons why they were not comfortable accepting a deal with conditions.
Can we also maybe learn something about what the FCC and or the DOJ was asking of Comcast that might have made them walk away? I mean, at one point, were they asking just too much, Alex?
I think part of that is absolutely true. From Comcast's perspective, you have to remember what Time Warner Cable is about 7 million U.S. cable subscribers. Well, Comcast could cobble together maybe slightly less than 7 million, but close to that number with several different M&A deals in the future if they were so inclined. Smaller deals, for instance, there are companies like Suddenlink or Mediacom or Cablevision or Cox that they could buy in a couple different deals. And those deals wouldn't have any restrictions on them theoretically because they'd be smaller bites. So why take a big bite if you're going to be tied up with a lot of restrictions, one of which may have been that they would have agreed to Title II restrictions, even if Title II goes away, because there's going to be a lawsuit on Title II as a bunch of different companies are suing to make this not law. If Title II were, in fact, to disappear and Comcast was restricted by Title II, where all of its other competitors weren't, that would put them at a severe disadvantage. So that may have been yet another reason why Comcast has come to the conclusion that it makes sense to walk, especially with no breakup fee.